Steadily it rises. Public preference for Lincoln Continental as the symbol for today's luxury motoring.
Okay, let's take a look at this 1961 Lincoln Continental. This was owned by Bob, the gentleman that owned Strange Engineering, but his name was Stange. And I don't know the proper pronunciation, but you guys, I'm sure, have heard of Strange Engineering. If not, just Google them. This car was a car that Chris Dunn acquired. Chris, of course, owns Lincoln Land, founded the company about 40 years or so ago. And it's a super nice Lincoln Continental sedan. A couple of the things that you'll notice on 61 that was really something that people love is it kind of has that unique, it has that unique front end, and it kind of gives you almost a Thunderbird feel to it. Some people, this is their favorite year. Some people, maybe their least favorite. These have grown on me over the years. I certainly think they're super classy. And again, you can see that front end is awesome. The headlights have been swapped out. There have been a couple of things, some that you may have already noticed on this car that we'll kind of talk about that have been maybe changed or altered. But the headlights, they work great on this car. Again, Kennedy was in a 61, and it had a 62 grille on it. My understanding was it was delivered in 61, and then by the time 62 came out, they wanted to kind of keep it, as you'd imagine, for the president, as updated as possible. Even in those days, they had swapped the front end on SX100X, I think technically is what the term was for the car, the code name. And you won't see this front end, you'll see the 62. So doing the walk around here, one of the things that some of you guys, I'm sure, have already noticed is the wheel covers, so also known as hubcaps. They have been converted over to the 64-65 hubcap. The 61 2s and 3s, just so you know, those were a 14-inch wheel. The original hubcaps you'll see in the trunk when we get to it, those are technically 14-inch wheels. These are the 64-65, and I think very similar 6 and 7 in terms of the hubcap itself, but I'm pretty sure these are the 4s and 5s, at least from appearance. That's what they look like. And as expected, this is a 235/75 R15. So this is a 15-inch wheel. I've heard of people doing modifications to allow for the hubcaps to work on even the different size, wheel, but I didn't anticipate that being the case here, and it wasn't. Again, this is a 15-inch wheel, which typically there'd be 14s, but I actually like the look of this. Beautiful Arctic white paint, but basically white. Looks fantastic. This car drives awesome. Chris got a chance to cruise over here after the concourse show yesterday. We had a great time. He had this 61, and he had a 63 convertible that he recently did kind of a mild restoration, new paint and things like that too. But this one is really stunning just to see kind of cruise down the road. Now, the mirrors, I know the passenger mirror wasn't offered, but again, the gentleman that owned this car, he did make some subtle changes to it, which I think were done very nicely. Now, I'm sure I'll cover this a little bit later as well, but the rear end of these cars is unique. Many people love the 61s. I think 62 was very similar, if not the same, for this pattern right here. See the Lincoln logo there where the gas fuel goes into. I'll cover that a little bit later. But very unique, very classy. And that is the setup for 61. Now, I do believe the taillights from 61 to 65, I do believe they are literally plug and play. However, some of you guys know 65, they added the cages, which was a little bit different. How you basically had a cage around it, which actually looked good. There were other changes down the road, like I've said in the past, like with these being stainless. That was super nice. Eventually they went with pot metal, and you'll see the later 60s where these will get all pitted and things like that. But I mean, again, the fit and finish on these cars and all of the bright work, if you will, is so nice and classy. It's truly not stunning, really, just to see one all put together so nicely, even with a few subtle changes. Now, the iconic suicide doors, also referred to as coach doors, they, you know, obviously people always ask, if you mention 60 Lincoln Continental, they always say with the suicide doors. That's something that's synonymous with these cars. But I was talking to Chris yesterday, rest in peace, Tim Nill. Tim had a 62 convertible that I ended up helping sell for a couple folks. And Tim had always told me that this little key deal, the cover, that was a 61 only. However, the early 62s. Now, I've had other people chime in my YouTube channel and say, well, my car was built in, like, you know, March of 62, you know, 5 months or so into the production run. I don't know necessarily when the cutoff was, but what I can tell you is 61s had this, some 62s. If you have a 62 and yours has this little latch cover, not latch so much, but keyhole cover, chime in, let us know, like, you know, do you happen to know, based upon your VIN, when your car was produced? I'd be kind of curious to see if, you know, how many people have this, how many that don't for 62. At some point they ran out of the part, or they had decided that they weren't going to use it. I don't really know what the story is there. The other thing that Chris had pointed out is the difference, and I'll try to flash a photo here, the difference in 61 versus even I think both 2 and 3. So Chris had a 3 there yesterday, and I took a photo of it. This L is a little bit, this line is a little bit longer on 61, and I think these in 1, I believe he said, were made out of aluminum versus what they went to afterwards. So that is one subtle difference. There are repops of these, but they're nothing like the original. And that classic font, you can even see that over Universal. They have a couple hotels in Orlando, and they have one that's kind of themed like after old cars and things like that. And one of the buildings is called Continental, and it's that same exact font. It's pretty neat. Now, taking a look at the trunk, you're gonna see a real nice deck lid underneath there. And the bright work is really, really nice. Super clean, super clean. So a couple things, Strange, you can see right there, this is a hatch, Strange Engineering, and you can look them up. There's a couple of Lincolns they were involved in. I know a custom resto mod, another 61, I believe, with big brakes and things like that. They've done some really cool things over the years, so check them out. The hubcaps, you'll see the originals in here, so that was a difference on the outside that you may have noticed in photos that I posted or in this video. And you can see just a real clean kind of carpet kit over the years that someone did. I kind of like this over here. You'll see a lot of times the guys will use a Jim Wallace kit. This is a real nice one, and it just kind of shows how clean a trunk area can be, as basic as sometimes it is. And plenty enough space in here to put things, luggage and whatnot, as you're going to shows. The 61 2s and 3s, if I remember correctly, they all kind of had this spare tire up in this area, and it was kind of leaned back, if you will, kind of at that angle. And that was the difference. I know in my 64, when I had gotten it, the spare tire is down in the section that's kind of cut out down here, right? So it's kind of a metal wall on each side, a tub, if you will, and it sits down there. So that was like one difference. I know the gas tank's a little bit different in these versus the 4s and 5s up underneath the car, of course. But if we look in here, you can see just again how clean things are, and just a nice one. Right over here you can see the antenna. So again, 1s and 2s, you basically have the antenna right here, and that was the difference they made in 63. It was no longer on the rear. They moved that. Another thing I wanted to point out when we go to close this, these things are effortless on opening and closing. Chris had pointed out to me, again, not owning a 1, 2, or 3, this was 61, 62, and then 63, you're going to see it was a lot different setup. And I'll try to maybe put a photo in here to kind of show the difference. Also, the difference here was how you put the fuel in. So a little bit of a subtle change in 1, 2, and to 3. But basically you could push that down, take off your cap, and then push your nozzle in. So it's pretty simple. You also have here, Chris had pointed out in the change from the 1 to the 3s, you can kind of see where this piece comes together. Can't even really tell that there's that little overlap, if you will. And then you have your trunk key you stick in right there. And again, very easy turn, and it pops open, and then you can easily lift this up. And with the tensioners that are up underneath there, it's crazy. You could just take one finger and kind of open this, and they just wanted things to be easy, and they certainly were. You can see in here, I've always talked about, when you're looking at these cars, from the outside, a lot of things can be hidden, but you just look and you see how clean that channel is in there. And it just kind of reinforces, what a nice car this is. Now, Tony and Chris, I had to ask this question recently because it was something that I was noticing on different listings. They reinforced in 1, 2, and 3, which I know this is kind of basic now that I think about it. But in 1, 2, and 3, this weather stripping was attached to the deck lid. It was not attached down here. And Chris his opinion is that this was a better setup, that he sees, potential less because the water would flow down here as long as the cars aren't sitting outside with tons of leaves and stuff. In 64, this trunk weather stripping is attached down here, and Chris seemed to think that would have caused potentially more moisture and things to kind of sit there versus the way this setup is here. You can see this car did sit outside last night here, and you can see a little bit of the water buildup from the dew. Of course, the car's fine, but it's just that was one change from 61, 2, and 3 to 64. Oftentimes you'll look at these cars, if they're a beater, and you'll see, like, especially I've seen this in 64 and stuff, where you'll start to see like all of this channels rusted out and just building up, moisture and things like that. And again, you can see how clean this car is. Super, super nice. So we'll kind of wrap the exterior up here in just a minute, but this is kind of back to that rear passenger 3/4 shot. Again, seeing these cars roll down the road is something that reinforces elegance in my mind. The cool thing is too, a lot of people, they don't like that these cars are often modified and lowered and things like that. And I understand, people like what they like, and that's fine. One cool thing about this car, in my opinion, is you look at the stance of it, and you look how that rear is even kind of definitely tucking tire and almost, right there at the hubcap. And it just really gives it a great stance. These cars ride fantastic, especially if they're well maintained, and or, if you've got an older car and maybe you want to refurbish it, you can always put new springs on it. You can buy that kind of stuff, and it will make it ride even better. But a car like this that was so well taken care of just really, really, really cruises very nicely. You can also see right here, the cover is also on the passenger side for the lock. And this one does have a passenger mirror added, which again wasn't, I don't believe was available at all until the late 66 model. So let's look at the interior of the 61 Lincoln Continental. And what you're going to see is on each of the doors, if you had the wood paneling, you would have 4, so 1 on each door. And then Chris pointed out to me 5, 6, 7, the piece underneath here, 8, 9, and I think that was the 10th piece, which you see behind the cluster. So those were some subtle changes that you'll see into 2 and 3 in terms of if you selected that wood option. Now, one thing that I've always liked about these earlier year 60s is you basically have what I refer to as the 3 pods. So you have the speedometer, the temp and fuel are over here. So you can see there, you got the Lincoln logo in there. And here you have the clock. So you can see that. Down here you have the blower control, if you have AC, the AC system, and the lighter. Now I pointed out recently in our friend Lou's car that Lou had this updated for his volume for his sound system, and Lincoln Land did that for him, which was kind of cool. But you know, this is a stock car for the most part. Here you have the door locks. Now the door locks in this car have actually been upgraded to electric, which is kind of cool. And you have the ignition there in the middle. You can see the little ring, and then you have the lights. The wipers just above that, so you see the washer for the windshield, and then you have fast and slow. And then you have your 2 indicator lights, which are brake and door. Over here, it shows the air conditioned vents, heater, and defroster. Now, one of the things I was asking Chris about yesterday at the Gasparilla Concourse is I've always understood if you didn't have AC, this was an ashtray. And he had confirmed, yeah, that was the case, because you would imagine if there was no air conditioning, then those vents wouldn't necessarily need to be there, right? So if you didn't have air conditioning, or if this car didn't have AC, that would be an ashtray. So you would say, well, if you have AC, where does the ashtray go? Well, one of the key things that Chris had mentioned is the door pods were a little bit different. So if you had air conditioning, you had your ashtray essentially here. So that's where that went. So pretty cool stuff. Now, you could see the AM radio here, kind of old school. The knobs match. In the 61s and 2s, you basically had like a what some refer to as like a 3-piece dash. So you had kind of this pod, the middle section, and this pod that did change in 63. So if you look at them, and I might try to flash a photo here because Chris had a 63 there yesterday as well, you'll get a chance to see. I think I may have taken a photo to show the differences. Now, Chris and I were talking about the glove box yesterday, and he kind of mentioned that when you push up here, it's a lot easier for me to do it with my hand this way. He kind of had mentioned where over the years you could imagine someone reaching over here and, you know, maybe pushing up on it, or, you know, their hands and things like that. So a lot of times he said that this, you could easily get manhandled over on this side. But basically what you have here is a real clean trunk, or excuse me, a real clean glove box. You have your switch there, which activates, you know, turns on the light. And then one of the features for the sedans was the trunk unlatch, and that was like a vacuum operated deal. So for those that don't know, if you know you were sitting in the car and you wanted to pop the trunk like you do on a modern car, you could also do that if you had that feature, and that's what it looks like right there. So your normal stuff in your glove box, and again, it closes very easy, and you've got your Continental badge right there. Is if you look, Chris had pointed out to me the L on 61 for the quarter panel badges is a little bit different than I think even 2 and for sure for 3. The L has that little tail, if you will, on the end, and we'll see that kind of on the quarter panel. I'll call that out. But this does easily close, so you would just push up on this, and if you were looking, you would push, and then that would come down. So kind of something cool there in terms of the vents. Steering wheel was real classy. You could easily push in for the horn. You can hear that there. And super simple, and again, you've got the kind of the color matched wood grain. The other thing that's always intrigued me, you know, me having a 64 and looking at parts cars and things like that, you know, not owning a 1, 2, or 3, is the way the rear view mirror comes down. So this one, you know, you can tell kind of is, I don't know what you'd call that shape, but it's kind of unique because it wasn't on the windshield. So you've got it mounted up there across that piece, that header piece, and then boom, it kind of just comes down and easily adjustable. Now, ironically enough, in my 64 where it's mounted, it's kind of a ball and it's a pain because you have to put a screwdriver in this side to tighten a screw, and one of my 65 just keeps like falling. There's probably some sort of something you can dab on it and then tighten it down that'll kind of hold it more, so I got to look into that. But you can imagine this, I mean, to me it seems pretty ingenious on how they did that. Now, looking at the sun shields, you can see here, there's no vanity mirror. I'm not sure if that was even an option then. Someone had given me one of these for a 60, I don't know, 62 or 63, and I want to say it had a cutout for a vanity mirror. I don't know if that was a convertible only. You guys could maybe chime in if you happen to know. But you can see these are in really, really good condition. Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to give a shout out to Chris for letting me do the kind of profile feature on this car. If you need parts or you're ever in the area and you want to check out Lincoln Land, here is the address. There's Chris's phone number. And hit him up. Take a screenshot if you need to. You got an email as well. Good people. They sell cars. They help sell cars. They've got plenty of inventory of parts. Now, what we'll do is we'll open the rear door to kind of get the full view here. This is kind of the entry, if you will. So I had the front door open with the rear open. You can kind of see how close they end up being, which is easy entry for the guest of these awesome cars. You can see how the dash looks kind of just looking in here from this angle. Now, one thing to point out that Chris had mentioned to me yesterday, because I had asked him, this car is customized a little bit, which I appreciate. Someone added these. So from the gentleman that owns Strange Engineering, that I mentioned that owned this car, they had added these, which I think are kind of a nice thing. And you'll notice that the seatbelts, although they may not be era specific, I'm sure Chris will end up changing that if he wants. I think it's, you know, cool that they're actually here, because safety is always first, of course. So when I mention that, I know some of you may kind of hone in on that, but that's kind of what you get. Now, there's one thing that I sometimes will talk about is, I believe I've mentioned this recently on a review I did. You can see the door tag is down here, but that's some of the information there. You can see in terms of the door tag. So we'll take a look at the headliner, how nice it looks. Chris had mentioned to me it wasn't until 64 that you had, I don't know if that's called that panel there, but the lighting is not there until 4. So you have your one dome light. And for those that did not know, you do have the Lincoln logo in that. Chris had mentioned to me in 61, these are chrome. And then I think in 2, 3, and so on, they become stainless. So that's a little bit of a little fun fact there. You can see here how nice it looks in the rear. The speakers were added, as they were in the kick panels. And again, this car was owned by the gentleman that owned or started Strange Engineering. So if you want to look that up, pretty big company. Chris has swapped out the carpet. I think it looks fantastic. And just looks really, really nice. You can see inside the door here how clean it is. And then the rear door to get out of the car, you would just pull up on that. Here you can see the ashtray, and that same color carries forward over to the front. You got your window switch there. Let's take a look at the passenger side. So you can see the passenger door. I'm not going to put my feet in the car right now, just because it's really dewy out today here in Florida. And you can see again the wood grain. You have your courtesy light here, which made a little bit of illumination for getting in and out of the car. You can see how clean this thing is. the glove box from the passenger side, and the cockpit, if you will, for the driver. Just a super nice car. I did see a feature recently. This is something I may have forgot to point out. You could switch this from day to night, which was kind of a cool little thing. And you can see right there how easy it was to do. So nice little touch. I often talk about on these cars, you can see by looking at the throttle or gas pedal, whatever you want to call it, and you know, that one, you can see how nice and clean it is. So yeah, you can kind of see, you know, how nice and clean that is. Just a real true, for the most part, original car. And it's so awesome to see Chris with this one. So with a little bit more room on this side, you'll see with the front door open, we'll kind of show opening the rear door for those that are maybe one day wanting to purchase one of these cars, or to see how easy it is. You just push this in and boom, you are met with pretty gracious entry. You can see how clean inside the doors are. And here's the rear seat. Now in 64, they did add a little bit of room. That was apparently some of the top feedback, and I've mentioned that in the past. If you look at, you know, Wikipedia or any kind of the main sources, Google, you'll see some of those key changes. So, you know, although you would say, hey, this is plenty enough room, definitely more than an airline, right? It still was something that they ended up changing, but you can see just how nice these sill plates and everything are here. Now, one thing I just noticed, I think in 64, 65, it says you got a Ford or Lincoln logo here. On these, I don't see it, which that might be a difference as well. It's kind of hard in the beginning. You think there's only a few things, but like Chris has pointed out, there's really more than meets the eye, so to speak. But that's kind of the rear. You do have the armrest. When that goes up, Chris kind of conceals it does have the rear seat belts. And again, the key would have been for the gentleman that owned it, you know, just the safety aspect of it. You can see the Lincoln logo there, just adding something. And I'm all for that, because down the road, if somebody wants to change anything, you know, it's easily changeable. You can take this out if you need to or whatnot. You can see where the seat belts bolt to those bolts right there. And that would be important because you want to stay in the car. God forbid you were ever in an accident. So we will close the door. Note there's no auto drop. And the key thing is, we've talked about this in social media and a little bit on the podcast, a good bit rather on the podcast with Pat Tian. These cars are considered a sedan. Now, looking into it over the years and kind of more understanding it, a hardtop car would have been one where with all four windows down, there would have been no pillar. So in these cars, they're considered sedan. Some guys have opted to remove this center post, right, which is really easy to do. For years, it was, you know, people suspected it was structural, and it's really not. But one of the things on these sedans, when you close this door, again, that window can be all the way up. The door shuts, and you just saw it's sealed up there very, very nicely. In the convertibles, the rear glass extends a little bit further up to, let's say, give or take about here. So what happens is it causes for that rear window to have to drop, so that when it's closed in the convertibles, it goes up and it seals against that convertible seal that's ran along here. So in these, again, you don't have to worry about it. It's one less thing. Now, technically, people have said over the years, and I've researched it, there were somewhere a handful, maybe 4 of the, quote, hard tops made by Lincoln. Apparently, maybe 1 or 2 still exist somewhere. I don't know where those are. But in those cars, I think their original intention was possibly to make them, but they would have had to maybe do the auto drop, and it would have just added more. So, you know, these cars already cost a lot of money, and they said, you know, are people really going to care about that back in the day? The type of people buying these cars weren't really maybe concerned with that pillar. So let me know what you guys think. You can see here one thing I think that Eric had mentioned. Eric works at Lincoln Land. He was at the Concourse show yesterday. There's some differences in the AC for these earlier year Lincolns between 1, 2s, and 3s, and I can't rattle off all the differences, but I do believe the AC also comes out here, which was key. And we'll look right here, I think is where it comes through, and then you can see right there. That's something I don't think I've seen a lot of people point out, but when Tony owned the 58 that he bought from Chris that eventually got sold to Snoop Dogg, believe it or not, that was one of the cool things. The ventilation came out through here. And I think in Chris's Mark II, and we saw a beautiful 57 Mark II at the show yesterday, those even had the AC that came out through the top. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of little things that you wouldn't necessarily know unless you really kind of spend some time, talk to the right people, and of course, just like look at the cars and compare the differences. Now, one other thing I wanted to notice, or point out rather, is these door locks factory are vacuum operated. And if they work well, they work. Sometimes they need attention if there's a vacuum leak or other potential challenge. But they are vacuum operated. However, a lot of the newer resto mod guys and guys that are kind of doing full builds on these, they convert them to electric locks. I know in the, the 80s and 90s, getting a third party alarm installed was a big thing, especially in the 90s when I was growing up. And, going to a local stereo shop or alarm shop, they could add in what they call keyless entry. And that's what the gentleman that owned this car did prior, which is pretty cool. If you ask me, because, if you think about it, in these old cars, if you lock your door and you go in to eat somewhere and you come out, you basically have to take your key out and unlock the door, right? Now on new cars, you can use an app to unlock your door, which is kind of insane, but I'll demonstrate this to you here. What we'll do, main thing is you have to make sure you don't lock your keys in your car. Remember, it's kind of an old school term almost in these days, because again, many of us, we've got cars. I know in my full-size truck that you guys might see in the background, if the key's like in the ignition, the system like will lock and then it unlocks immediately. So there's a lot of different things built into the newer cars that hopefully avoid doing this. But again, I've got the key fob in hand, and what I'm gonna do is lock it, and you can see, boom, went right down. But again, you can kind of see how that worked. So it's kind of cool. Now, one other thing to point out on this car is these are NOS hubcaps that Chris had acquired, and it might have been Chris that decided to change out the wheels just for a different look for the 15s. I'll have to confirm that with them. And these were literally NOS out of the box hubcaps, which are super rare these days. I waited a little while to let the dew kind of burn off so you can get a good representation of the car in the sun. Looking good. Again, thanks for watching. Appreciate the support. Hey, there you have it. The 61 Lincoln Continental sedan. Again, this is a sedan. The hardtop wasn't a version that was technically produced for the public. A little bit difference if you didn't know. Again, it has to do with that pillar and kind of the overall stance of the fact that this was a pillar car and it was considered a sedan. And I don't think anybody complained about that back in the day. Guys are modifying them, and that's their prerogative, right? But again, a beautiful car. Thanks to Chris for letting me do the feature on this one. If you need parts, hit up Chris Dunn and team, whether it's George or Teresa or whoever answers the phone, they can take care of you. These cars are definitely elegant. If you've got one that needs a little bit of bringing up to speed, certainly put the time and energy in it. These cars continue to go up in value, and we love seeing them on the road. We love seeing them at shows. And there's still some out there that we don't know about. And we'd love to see you guys restore them and get them out there cruising, because people love seeing them. ODB, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching all the way through. And check out Lincoln Addict podcast via most podcast avenues. You can Google or go to lincolnaddict.com and you can find out ways to listen. Apple, you go to the pre-installed podcast app. Android, download Podbean and just search Lincoln Addict. Also, make sure you subscribe. We out of here. Peace.
The Lincoln Continental is the big, roomy luxury car. It will be motordom's symbol of quality, an automobile and a tradition.